Welcome to Scars to Stars, where conversations and personal stories let us know we are not alone. In this show, you will meet authors and speakers from our books and events as they share vulnerable personal stories to spread hope and inspire you through adversities in your own life. The world is a difficult place. You will find like-minded people here with kind hearts and supportive souls. I am your host, Dina Brown Mitchell. I am a suicide survivor and the founder of the Realize Foundation. I am so glad you are here. Let's dig into this meaningful conversation. Hi, everybody. It's Dina at the Realize Foundation. And today I'm here with Camden Mcgregor. He is the VP of Operations with Tribe and Purpose. And he also is a co-host of the 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. So welcome, Camden.
Thank you, Dina. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited you're here too. I want you to dive into where you want to start with your story.
Yeah, it seems a little dramatic, I guess, to start to start it off like that, but that's what we're here for. So, my story I think really goes back to my time playing rugby. So I played rugby here at the U of A. You can see actually now that I'm full screen, you can definitely see all the different Arizona hats behind me. Definitely my favorite of the collections. But so I was playing college rugby here at the U of A and had a weightlifting accident basically and hurt my back. And I wasn't able to play anymore, went through really a lot of loss of identity. So I was studying agricultural business at the time. Dina, I know you and I have talked enough. You know that I have a background in that. I've done a handful of ventures in the ag space. But that's not what my mind was on when I was in school. It was very much centered around rugby. The agriculture to me was like a retirement job. Like one day I will, when I've retired professional rugby, make a bunch of money. I will buy a farm and I'm going to have cows and do the whole thing and be Texas retired, and it's gonna be great. And that was my whole mindset with it. I was on this kind of one-track mind. And then when I had that weightlifting accident and hurt my back, this didn't happen all at once. You kind of go through the shock of the injury, not really sure the magnitude of the situation, especially with things like your back. The spine is such a tricky thing. It can be very delicate and have some really bad long-term effects. So it was something where I wasn't really sure what I was dealing with. I had back pain before that, honestly, just from being tall and an athlete my whole life. I just kind of always had a little bit of a bad back, but this was different. And so as that kind of set in and I realized, how much things were changing, how much pain I was in, just about every single day, the problems I was having with just everyday life after that from this injury, I kind of realized that I was in a spot where I didn't really know what I was going to be doing. I think up until that time, even with the background in agriculture and wanting to, have my own farm, that all is stuff that uses your back. When I was working on my uncle's farm, getting hooked on agriculture, as I like to joke about, I was talking with him and I had a bad shoulder at the time, just another rugby incident. That one got messed up in a tackle. And I was talking about getting shoulder surgery and all these kind of things. And he goes, hey, you can't really farm with one arm. How much do you love rugby? Do you love rugby more than you want to farm? And at the time, it was an easy answer. I'd say, yes, I love rugby more, and so I wanted to keep playing. But with the back injury, it was this kind of realization that this was very different. This is not something that I'm sure I can come back from. And then also, it's one of those things where, even if you can come back from a bad injury like that, there's also the question of if it's worth it. How many more years am I going to be able to play? What does this do to the injury long term? With back injuries, there's that whole domino theory of you mess up one disc and it kind of jacks up the one above it and then the one above that, and it just keeps going. And so I didn't have this realization that it was like a magical moment of I want to change. I want to get, I want to do something different. Really, I just kind of spiraled and felt sorry for myself. And I say that in a way, not like it's so easy, feeling sorry for yourself. It's a hard place to be. And you're feeling sorry for yourself because you're in a really bad situation. And, you should feel sorry for yourself. There's a lot to be said for that. But as I was kind of going through that, I didn't really have much of a sense of direction. I was feeling very purposeless, not really sure what I wanted to do, just kind of going through the motions with things. And fortunately for me at the time, I reached out to my dad, Otis, my co-host for 10X Your Team and the founder of Tribe and Purpose. And I was talking with him. And at the time, he had just started doing some veteran transition coaching. And so I actually was able to get some really great insights into what it is like transitioning out of the military and apply a lot of that to what I was dealing with. Now, I didn't know what I was transitioning towards at the time. I guess I kind of knew broadly agriculture. I didn't know what that looked like. I was still just picturing my farm in the middle of nowhere with the cows and, by myself, not a big business or anything. And so going through the transition coaching with him, one of the things that we talked about was the importance of understanding, your purpose. Of course, with our business name, Tribe and Purpose, purpose is a very important piece to us. I think when you understand your purpose, it really helps you as that kind of guiding light when you go through these really tough moments of transition where you have a dream in front of you, a path in front of you that's kind of taken away cruelly like that. And so by understanding your purpose and going through that work, what it does is it helps you to, and what it did, it helped me to build out a new path and build out that identity. When people are transitioning out of the military, one of the things that is, there's a lot that goes into making that transition very difficult, much more difficult than what I went through. But one of the things that they go through is this loss of identity. You had this job, you had this set list of things that you were doing, you had this very good structure that you were operating inside of, depending on how long you were in for, 10, 15, my dad's case, 25 years. So when you're opting inside of that structure and then you move outside of it, you no longer have that identity. And if you do have some new identity, it's not going to be near as powerful as it was when you were in the military. If you picture your identity, take my dad as an example, being out Green Beret, their phrase of "de oppresso liber," liberate the oppressed. That's a powerful purpose. That's a really exciting thing. That's something that gets you out of bed in the morning, get you to work, right? When you are just a sales guy or just a manager or some title like that, it's like, yeah, you can have your identity in that job, but you don't have a purpose behind it. You're not going to be very tied to that identity. And so by going through that, one of the things I thought about was my time. What attracted me to agriculture was actually very similar, even though it might sound weird, as to what I enjoyed the most about rugby. It was helping people. And I know for folks who don't know rugby, or who know a little bit of rugby, just know it as that violent, crazy sport like football without the pads. There's some truth to that. But honestly, I could tell you that, when I played my best games, everything I was doing out there, I wasn't doing because I was doing. I wanted to go hit somebody or something like that. It was all about protecting the guy next to me. Me going out there and working to beat the opposition, not because I want to go beat them up, but because if I beat them up, that stops them from beating up my guy. And as weird as that might sound, that was a lot of my approach to it. In fact, actually, that's something I still coach a lot of the times now with the U of A when I'm out there coaching. It is something where it's like you tied in as a team, you 15 guys, you're out there by yourself. You have to support each other. And that was a thing that I love so much about the game and part of why I get back to the game so much now. But having that identity of wanting to help people, and I realized that was something that was important to me, that I kind of started to see this thread from my time in rugby to what attracted me to agriculture in the first place. For farming, for me, I don't come from a family of farmers. I mentioned my uncle. He's not even a real uncle. He's just a friend, a family friend that we call Uncle. Shout out to Uncle Ben. But, I didn't have a background in that. The thing that stood out to me was, one, I liked, being outside. I like working with my hands, all those kind of things. That was all my jobs I'd worked throughout high school were like that, high school and college. And then also the other piece that really attracted to me was the sense of service. The idea that I was there and I was able to help people. It's a different kind of helping people than my dad would talk about, being a Green Beret, but it was still serving my community by having, growing fresh food for them, having healthy options, those kind of things, right? Being able to take care of your community by nourishing them and giving them food is a pretty exciting thing. It's a great service to be able to offer. So that was really exciting to me. And when I started to connect those dots and I saw that kind of thread of helping people, it helped me to start to understand what my identity was and what I wanted to do with my life, the impact that I wanted to have on the folks around me. And it really did just go back to that idea of helping people. Now, and I've kind of hinted at this a couple of times. This is me telling it hindsight 2020. Things don't flow that easily. What happens to a lot of people in this transition period is the same thing that happened to me. This pitfall of taking that same identity that was in your career or as in your passion, in my case with rugby, and you apply that same type of energy into another area without kind of doing the groundwork that's necessary in order to sustain that. And what I mean by that is I took all of my purpose, I took all of my identity and I put it right into entrepreneurship. So for a while, for 2-3 years, really, I was in a great spot. I was an entrepreneur. I loved talking about it. I loved sharing my story with everybody. I loved telling people what I was going to do, all my business ideas. I loved hearing other people's business ideas. I was just so full of energy with it. Well, then I graduate college, go start my first business. Some things go wrong. That's a whole another story for another day. Some things go wrong there, and I wind up moving on and starting another business. That one kind of flounders for a bit. And then I have this moment where I'm kind of stalled out in my entrepreneurial journey. And I had this time of kind of looking at myself of like, oh, you messed it up. You're not a good entrepreneur. You're a failure. You know, all those kind of moments there, all that kind of negative self-talk started really happening. Well, because my identity was entrepreneur, now because I was not a successful entrepreneur, I did not have these, $1 million exits and these kind of things like that. I was able to tell myself like, oh, then I'm a failure because my purpose of entrepreneurship was being challenged by that. So it creates this kind of messed up situation where you are now again really putting all your eggs into that basket, and it's a dangerous place to be. And so because I was tied up as an entrepreneur and that's who I felt I was, as soon as my business didn't do well, I felt all of that pressure coming back to my back injury. I felt that same spiral, that same negative spiral, fell into depression, all those same kind of things that happened after my injury. And what I realize now in hindsight, of course, hindsight's so much easier to tell these kind of things, right, Dina? The difference is understanding what aspects are you and what aspects are your career, what aspects are what you're doing, right? My purpose is to help people. I can help people in a million different ways. I do a lot of different things between rugby, nonprofits I work with, our coaching, all these different things. And it all is with the guys helping you. I want to help people. And same kind of thing, I applied that purpose to my family and my friends, all those kind of things, right? My purpose is to help people. That right there is enough. When you look at it that way and you identify your purpose, you can always do a little bit and work towards it. There's these like smaller versions of your purpose where you're just kind of, I'd like to talk about like ripple effects, just tossing the stone in the pond, just trying to do something good. And you're not always necessarily going to make a huge impact. When I think about my purpose of helping people through entrepreneurship, of course, there's all sorts of really big things I want to do and all these big ideas. I still have all that kind of stuff, but I don't tie my personal worth to that anymore. Instead, I tie it to just helping people. If I put back an extra a cart at the grocery store, right, that somebody leaves in the parking lot, you go put that back. Hey, I just helped somebody with their job a little bit. That's a nice thing. And so what I learned through this process is if you chunk down what you're doing, you understand that kind of big picture purpose, and you start to look at it through your whole life, all of your life categories, how we like to put it with Tribe and Purpose, rather than just thinking through your career. What you do is you get an idea for who you really are. And then it becomes a lot harder for that outside world to shake your identity, to shake that sense of purpose. And you can always keep working towards it, even in those really small areas. Of course, we want to make big impacts. That's, a big impact is better to help more people. That's also great. But for your own personal mental health, you also need to recognize, hey, if I can just go help one person, that's a good place to be. And when you start to flip it around like that, it helps you to sustain yourself through that journey rather than, feeling like a failure every time something doesn't go right. So I think that's a really big key piece of that, of understanding what that identity and that purpose looks like.
Yeah, I agree with you. I want to ask you questions and go back a little bit to
yes.
when you had your back injury and you couldn't play rugby and you were on the team, and can you tell us more about that and how you really got through that? Because I think it's important if somebody else goes through a similar thing, they play sports, they get hurt, they can't do it. What advice would you have for them?
Yeah, I think, one thing that I think is interesting in my situation, and I wish I had done differently, and this is one of the things I think about, because I see this with my players now. I coach the same team I played on, would have been about 10 years ago, almost exactly, that I hurt my back. So coaching these same types of guys, right? And I see guys go through that with injuries. And one of the things that I am very encouraged to see a lot of now that I didn't do, and I don't think I had as much, was pouring back into the team. For me, the team became a kind of a pain point, because I was so frustrated. I loved it so much and wanted to play so badly. I couldn't go watch them play because I was frustrated I wasn't playing. Even in my early years of coaching, I would feel that same kind of frustration. And of course, I legally couldn't play. I was too old now, but I would be out there coaching and I'd be like, oh my gosh, I could do that so much better. I wish I was out there and had that same fire. That fire never really goes away. You can ask I could think of at least 5 or 10 different times I've had this conversation before a game with my rugby boys now at the U of A, going through and just being like, what? And they're like, what, coach? I'm like, I just want to hit something. It's still here. And every game day, I just get that feeling of like, oh gosh. And coaching helps, but it doesn't quite cover that. And I think that because that is such a painful thing, it's really easy to shy away from it completely. That you don't want to recognize that pain at all, and you kind of just move away completely. And I think especially with sports, a lot of people do that, and it kind of just becomes I could have gone pro if it wasn't for my bump knee, and then it becomes this kind of like joking story that we all have, and we all know people sitting down at the bar talking like that. But the reason that people wind up like that is because it's so painful that they can't go back to the sport. So I think number one thing is staying connected with that same community and those same guys that you're playing with, even though you do have a disconnection from them. That's a reality of the situation. You're not really playing. You're not really suffering with them. When I talk about that same fire that I get on game days nowadays, that's part of it. Is I don't get to go suffer with these guys that much. And even though it kind of sounds like a weird thing. I'm almost 30 years old. I've got a daughter, and I'm like, I want to go suffer. It's like, but there's a thing. It's camaraderie. It's team, right? And so because you're disconnected from that, it can be really hard. But I think pushing through that, I think it's what you get out of it on the other side is much more valuable. I think the community you get out of it is much more valuable. The other thing I would say is as far as like looking back on that time period goes, I think it's so easy to, I don't know, just bottle things up and like not address the real depth of it because things can feel, silly, really. It's I didn't feel the need to go talk to people and talk to my closest friends about how sad I was that I couldn't play professional rugby because it's just a dream. It's just a thing I want to do. It all felt kind of silly, but it's at the same time, it's like that's something that was very, very painful for me. And it was a very hard thing to get through. So I think recognizing that and being willing to talk to people about it and why that's so painful, I think is another thing that I would recommend for people because I don't think I did a very good job of that. I think those two things can help to really get you through that because also you got to think when it comes to hanging up the cleats, to take this example, especially when it's due to a medical reason, an injury. Mm-hmm. Who do you think has been through that? All the people in the sport that you are leaving and cutting yourself away from, right? I know that now, and I'm very connected with my rugby community. I do a lot with my rugby family, but it's like you people will disconnect themselves. And it's like those are the only people who can understand you. Those are the only people who know how much fun in this weird game of rugby is and how much I love it and all these weird things. I could talk to you about, Dina, and you would just look at me like I am crazy, and I get that. I do. It's a weird. We're the wackadoos out there playing rugby. I get it. It's a crazy thing, but for the people who actually understand it are part of that community, and that's where you want to pour back into because that's your support structure. Going back to our company name of Tribe and Purpose, that's really the key there is understanding your purpose, how it connects into these different areas of your life, and then having that tribe to support you because you can't do it all on your own. And it's even better if you have a tribe that can really understand you like the community that you are a part of.
That is so true. It's funny, I was just on a call talking about the same thing about entrepreneurs and how we need support, for ourselves, whatever. But I think when you talked about your dad and the transition of veterans from, combat or service to civilian life, I mean, did you learn any deeper lessons about what you're talking about from them?
Yeah, a lot. And I would say, honestly, most of those have come later, probably more through our podcast, because I think we've talked with a lot of veteran entrepreneurs who about that transition to entrepreneurship from their time in the military. And I think the really the deepest thing, I think, something I kind of already mentioned, but is that tie to purpose and that structure. And I think that we don't necessarily think about those two things in our lives that often. We don't, when we leave a job, we're not upset. We're upset about our paycheck. We're not upset about the fact that we're losing structure to our life, right? We usually, I think, want to break out of structure. That's the way we tend to think out of things. But in reality, we all have a structure that we operate well inside of. And so when you don't have that structure, it can get really difficult to build your own. Because that's what this all comes down to, whether it's identifying your purpose, building your tribe, creating a vision for success and pushing yourself towards it. All of that comes back to you. You have a responsibility for yourself and for your family and friends to take care of yourself and push towards these goals and to go make that impact, right? And when you understand that it just comes back to you, then what you can do is you can really pour into it. And you're talking about like entrepreneurs and growth and those kind of things, right? And it's like, we need that support system. That's what it really comes down to, is as you go through these journeys, whether it's as an entrepreneur or not, you can apply these same lessons to, to a desk job as well. But it's like, as you're going through that, you have to you have the responsibility to create your own structure of where you're going to thrive. And I think we can both think of plenty of people in our lives that don't have a structure, and we watch them kind of flounder around, and they show up sometimes and they're nice people and we keep them around, but we keep them over there because we know that they don't have the structure to operate on these kind of things. They can't plan out a week. You can't plan a Christmas trip with them started here in August. You know what I mean? Like, those things just don't work like that. And so I think that structure is a really big piece of it. And then I think it also just goes back to that tying of purpose. You have a responsibility to create your own purpose and to identify your purpose and to live it. And, when you're in the military, that purpose is kind of handed to you. And it's a powerful thing. That's not a knock at the military, anyone in it. That's a good thing. And honestly, I think a lot of people would probably be a lot happier if they had purpose handed to them like that. A little bit more of an assembly line type method there. But at the core level, you take that responsibility and you have to go define that for yourself. And that is a very hard thing as far as going through the motions of that. And it's scary because just like as an entrepreneur, you're picking a business and you're thinking, I could go in this direction. It's like, this is my target audience. This is my, here's my product. Here's what I'm going to sell, all that kind of stuff. Well, if that's wrong, then now it's, I'm a failure. I got to stop. And then you go back to the drawing board and you wind up kind of hitting these roadblocks over and over again. That's what's going to happen. Things are going to go wrong. What you have to do is you have to start to recognize that the roadblocks they're not the end. It is just you along this journey. And you can't use those roadblocks as a reason to not take action. And I think that's what happens to a lot of people. And I've seen it in the veterans transitions or veterans transitioning out of the military. And I've seen it with a lot of other entrepreneurs as well, where they don't take the time to kind of define out these processes and things. And so what do? They don't have a purpose. They don't have a tribe. They don't have a mission. They don't have any of these kind of things. And when you don't have all of that, then it's just like the person who can't keep their schedule straight, right? It becomes a very hard and stressful place to be because you have no certainty in your life. You have no routine. And I think that those are the two biggest pieces that I've seen with them transitioning out.
Hi there, it's Dina. If you like our podcast and you're enjoying learning about other people's stories of overcoming adversity, please go over to therealizefoundation.org and support us by donating. We believe that conversations, community, and personal story can change lives and reduce suicide ideation. And we also have a way, if you have a business, you can support us without money out of your pocket. So go on over to realizefoundation.org and look at the donate page, and you can learn how to support us as a business, and also you can donate any amount. Thank you so much.
The other thing that comes to mind is the skills. And this is one that's always very interesting to me, especially to folks who I think aren't as connected with the military. I'm an Army brat, and I've been military adjacent my whole life, hanging out with a lot of veterans and talking to a lot of veterans on our podcast and those kind of things. But one of the things that's so interesting to me is the amount of skills that these folks have getting out of the military, and the fact that it doesn't translate into the civilian world, not because the skill doesn't translate, but because it literally doesn't translate. Like the word translate, like language there. It is a point of, it's like, I do staff duty. All right, dude, whatever. You were in the staff duty. No, you were a manager. You kept track of all the paperwork. You did all these things. You did admin, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, all it takes is translating your skill set to this new application. I do the same thing when I coach college athletes transitioning into the real world. Definitely a little bit of a lower stakes transition there, but same kind of thing. Your sport was your purpose, and then whether it's because of an injury or because you graduated and aren't going pro, now you're without that. And they run into the same kind of problem of, it's like, okay, I have all these skills. I dedicated my whole life to this sport, but I can't go to you, Dina, and say, hey, I really deserve this job. I was great. You should have seen me playing rugby. I was so good in the scrum. I'm the best. It's like, that doesn't mean nothing. And it means nothing to you. But if I told you I knew how to direct my team and I operated in a small team environment, independent of coaching instructions from my leader, ooh, now all of a sudden I'm an independent leader who's leading my small team. It's like, you see, it's like, you just have to learn how to translate it.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a big piece when it comes to the transition side as well.
I think also, I don't usually tell my story on these, but I have a story that relates to what you're talking about. And that is, for 30 years, I did events. I worked in hotels, and then I owned my own company. And I did all kinds of corporate events and conferences and all of that. And I was good at it. I made money at it. People came to me and asked me for questions and to mentor them. And, so I thought that was what I was supposed to be doing. Well, I lost my business in 2020, and I didn't really know what I was going to do. And it forced me to find my purpose. And part of what helped me do that, and I want to give this resource in case there's somebody who needs it, is there's a book called The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. And, I do have it right here. So I can show it to you. It's called The Big Leap. It's a goldfish trying to get in a bigger bowl, right? So this book talks about your zone of excellence versus your zone of genius. Mm-hmm. And I read it during COVID. And what I realized was events were my zone of excellence. I was good at it. People thought I was good at it. I enjoyed it. And what I was processing for myself at the time was I lost a friend to suicide, and I was starting a nonprofit for suicide prevention. And what I learned was that was my purpose. And I had survived an attempt, in 1997. I was in my 20s, and I'd never talked about it. And I feel like there was no evidence that I should have made it through that night. So I know that God saved me, but I didn't understand why until like 25 years later. Mm-hmm. When my friend died, I was like, okay, now I feel like God's just like, knocking, saying you need to speak up. And so I've now had that nonprofit for 5 years, and that's what this podcast is all about. And it's so crazy to live like that long thinking what your purpose is. Mm-hmm. And I feel like it's probably similar for people who are in the military, especially if they're like career military. Like that's what they know, that's what they've done. And then all of a sudden it's gone. And like, what do you do? How do you even find that, And so this book really helped me. And so I hope it could help others. But once you figure it out and you really discover that thing that like makes you want to get out of bed in the morning and makes you want to help people, that's what you're looking for. And I think that's what you're explaining, but I just had to add that.
No, I love that. Thanks for sharing that. And I think that goes back to, I think, the importance, you not understanding it for, I think you said 25 years, right? That's the kind of funny thing is that's almost part of the journey in its own weird way of, I could talk about all my life and my life categories and my purpose through each life category. I'll come back on the show in 10 years and I'll go through it again. It's going to be different. I'm sure I'm going to have different, at the very least, different language around it, not to mention a completely different sentiment as to what my purpose is, because it's always going to be, changing to an extent. I think that's the kind of key piece. And that's why I think it's important to understand it in these like specific contexts, as well as what I call like the big picture. So if you notice when I mention my purpose, I usually tend to talk about it in just the big picture. I just say, I like to help people. My purpose is to help people. I like to keep it broad like that, because to me, that connects into every area of my life. We talk about with Drive and Purpose, it's one of our kind of fundamental philosophies. There's no such thing as work-life balance. It's all life. And we talk about it in terms of life management. And we talk about that in terms of your life categories. So for people, and I've kind of run through this super quickly so people can go through a little bit of this process for themselves. Otherwise, I think I have a free training on our YouTube that goes through all this. If not, just reach out and I'll give you a call and I'll do it for you. But anyway, the idea here is you come up with like 3 to 5 different categories of your life, things that you're spending your time doing, things like family, friends, work, hobbies, those kind of stuff there. Then once you do that, You identify them out, and then define who you want to be in that category, the impact you want to have, how you want to be known, a little bit of like the write your own eulogy, how do you want to be remembered, all of those kind of things when you look at that specific category. Then with that, you're able to come up with these great names for the category. And I always talk about this because it seems like such a silly part of the process, but the names are really important because it personalizes it. It makes it something really unique to you, and that helps you to be more excited about it. Going back to the idea of like purpose, right? And having all these. If I tell somebody, we go back to that assembly line model, and I just hand you your purpose, yeah, that'll work to some extent, but you're not going to be really bought in. You're chasing someone else's fantasy. I say all the time, it's like, what are you going to go get married, have the wife, 3 kids, 2 cats and a dog, and then get the white picket fence and all that, and they go, you know what? I want to live alone in the mountains. It's like, no. Decide what you want and then go chase it, right? Don't follow someone else's dream on it. So identifying what your personal definition is for that life category. I could give one for my family life category. It's CHA, C-H-A, caring husband always. It was husband before I was married. I haven't updated it to father. To me, it's like, I think I know what that means, right? But it's going to keep evolving in those kind of ways. I can think about it in the context of rugby, a fit coach growing the game. I always say you can either be a fit coach or a fat coach. I'd rather be the fit coach. And then I love the game of rugby. It gave me everything I have in my life, I think, and I want to give that to other people. So that's how I want to grow the game, right? So that's 2 examples of it. I could go through my other ones for my kind of catch-all category and my business category. But the key there is you have that definition of what it is personally to you. Then you take that big picture purpose of helping people and you go, okay, how am I living my purpose of helping people through this category of rugby? And then it helps you to think a little bit more intentionally of, okay, hey, am I just going to go out there and coaching today? Or am I going to go out there and I'm going to try to be a model for them? I'm going to try to teach them about life. I'm going to try to help them with their decision-making processes. I'm going to do all these different things, right, that pour into them and help them to grow into the young men that they need to be, right, to go out into the real world. And when you start to look at it like that, you see more opportunities to live your purpose in those different categories. And you could do the same thing for helping your family, or in my case, helping my family, helping in business. All these different things, they go back to helping people. Well, everything I'm doing with Tribe and Purpose is to help people develop leaders inside of their team so that they can go make an impact with their business and help even more people, right? It's this amplifying effect there. And so when you understand your big picture purpose, it allows you a lot more flexibility as to the application of that purpose, which is good because like we talked about with both of our stories and the twists and turns that come up with things, like you don't know what the heck's going to happen. You really don't. And so you have to have some flexibility because if I said my purpose is to feed the state of Arizona and I'm going to feed them bell peppers and chickens and romaine lettuce, and I just set out like that and went all in on my ag journey and just committed to that completely, well, then what happens when my wife gets a job at the University of Colorado and we move to Boulder? Or what happens when, I don't know, it gets too dry out here in the desert and we got to stop farming out here because there's no water and I got to move to California. Like whatever it is, there's all these types of things. You don't know what's going to happen. But the key is coming up with a good enough definition to start taking action. And then as things change, make those adjustments. It's not a problem. But if you never take action in the first place, then you don't get the opportunity to know what those changes are that you need to make.
Yeah, that's very true. It's funny, while you were talking, I was thinking about the fact that I grew up in one place until I went to high school, or until I went to college. And since college, I have moved 52 times.
Ooh, you got me beat. I was an Army brat then.
And I think I've lived in 8 states and I've traveled a lot. I've been very blessed in that department. But I think it really changes you about change when you move a lot because you get used to it. And, I know people who've lived in the same house since they were born and they're a grandmother, and I can't relate to that. And they can't relate to the fact that I've moved so much. And so it's all about what your situation is and what you're used to. And when change happens, how do you adapt to it? And I think that applies to everything we've been talking about is change and like how do we navigate that? And there's lots of books on that. There's lots of ancient people who wrote things that we still quote and all that.
Oh yeah.
But I think change. It all comes down to change. Like when you hurt your back, it was a change. How did you deal with it?
Yeah, I think what that reminds me of, and it's an interesting thing, one of the, I guess you could say, trends I've noticed over the years with our podcast and other interviews I've done with folks is these interesting things of like the pauses in life. And there's some people who are really good about structuring pauses. Like, for instance, Dina, like with those moves, you might have had a system down a little bit where it's like each time you're moving, that's a pretty good opportunity to pause. You might not have structured it like that, but you had these kind of pauses that were kind of built into your life. And what happens is if you don't have those pauses, you don't notice your changes. And what I mean by that is you don't notice changes in a bad way. What's coming to mind is a clip from our podcast. My dad said this years ago, talking about how to boil a frog. Dina, have you ever heard the phrase of boiling a frog? So it's, how do you boil it, right? Do you throw it in the pot of boiling water? No, because it jumps out. You got to put it in the cold water and you turn the fire on and let it heat up slowly, right? Because then the frog doesn't notice the environment is changing. That's what happens to all of us. And so the key is to build in patterns for those pauses. Talking about whether with your story, talking about your friend's suicide and losing the business, that's a forced pause, right? That is something happened where you went, oh, I have to take accountability right now. I have to figure out what's going on. When I hurt my back, that was a forced pause. I was in college and still had classes and things. I had things to distract myself with, but there was still a forced pause. This thing is not working. What is going on here? But the fascinating thing, there's so many people on the podcast we've talked to over the years that have had injuries or near-death experiences, or get punched in the face and get their jaw wired shut for 6 months. It's like there's all these different things like that. But it's what happens is they have these moments where they are forced to pause, and they come out the other side usually with a little bit of wisdom. And I don't think that's because we all need to get our jaw wired shut every few years or so, even though maybe some of us. But my wife might be on board with that idea. I talk quite a bit, but no, really what it is we need these opportunities to pause, and you can build those into your life. When people talk about like meditation, just being comfortable with your own thoughts, that's the kind of like smaller version of it. But when we talk about these bigger pauses, it's getting into a deeper level of recognizing what the root problem is going on. It's like, oh, I'm not really happy with this job, or I don't even like this career. I don't like the place I'm living, those kind of things. And when you're in the routine, you're just like that frog in the boiling water. You're not going to notice what's going on around you. And I think that's really the key when it comes into that, of recognizing what's going on. I think another example of forced pause is why we saw so many career changes after COVID, because you made people sit still for a really long time, and people changed their mind about all sorts of different things while they're sitting still because they hadn't thought about it, because they didn't have a chance to, because they kept themselves busy. And so I think that's a really key piece of just making sure that you are building in those pauses and trying to take that time to really reflect, because that's the other key of what you're talking about there, of like different experiences. And everyone, it's like, I can't really relate. We could talk, but it's like I can't imagine living how you're living. You can't imagine living how I'm living. That's how it goes, right? People are different. But the key to all of what we're talking about here, the foundation is self-reflection and honest self-reflection. If you can't do that, then it doesn't matter how many of these podcasts or 10X Your Team podcasts you listen to, or how many books you read, those kind of things. You're never going to get it right, because you are still mimicking someone else. You're not taking the time to do the work yourself and figure out what your answer is. You're just kind of parroting someone else's answer. And so I think that key of doing the work is such a big piece of it.
Yeah, it's true. I think it when you're in a situation of forced pause, like you said, you're forced to figure it out and to think about it hopefully differently, or what your options are, and kind of figure that out. But I think also the strategic pauses are just as important, because I wrote a book in 22 about entrepreneurs and how they are so overwhelmed and exhausted and overworked, and I don't like the word burnout that much, but it kind of explains it. And you're saying no to your friends and family all the time, and you're missing out on things you want to do in life, or hobbies, or friends, or events. And how do we get out of that situation as a business owner, where we feel like we have to do everything all the time for everybody? And I actually wrote a book about that, because I went through that and made changes. My business doubled, and then I lost it all. But I wrote a book about it because I was like, well, it's COVID and I have all this time on my hands. So I'm going to write a book, and maybe
Forced
it will
pause.
help somebody else when we get back to the, the mayhem of life, once everything gets back to normal. And maybe there are business owners or entrepreneurs out there who need this framework to, take better care of themselves and still have a successful business. And I think, the research I did said 72% of people have the most creative ideas in the shower. And when we give our brain a break, we have more creativity and more productivity. So to reach more business success, we need both of those things. But if we're working 18 hours a day every day and not taking a break and not eating properly, then our brain is not able to help us with those things.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's a big, another big purpose in my life.
No, I love that. And I think there's so much truth to, it's like we as entrepreneurs, we're really good problem solvers, and we're really good like getting in the dirty. It's like those 18-hour days. We're great at that. That's what brought us to this career. It's why we're still in this career. That is that is the entrepreneur bone, if you will, right? Well, the downside of that is you can't do those sprints forever. And if you don't have these strategic pauses to step back and go, hey, I need to slow down a little bit right now because otherwise I'm going to implode and I'm going to literally wind up in the hospital. I always think of our good friend, Christopher Rausch. He great coach out in California, awesome guy, great podcaster. But he'll tell these stories about like when he was starting his business and building out, and he literally went to the hospital because I'm sorry, I'm not a doctor. He was either completely out of adrenaline or it had dumped all the adrenaline into him and his glands were empty. There's something weird with that where he had literally burnt himself out, like completely, wound up in the hospital for like 5 days because of this, right? And it was just from overworking himself in his business. So we can push through the crap. That doesn't mean we necessarily need to push through the crap. We talk about it. One of my favorite stories to tell goes back to hunting up in Wyoming with my dad. And we talk about, if anyone out there has ever been to Wyoming, there are these beautiful rolling golden hills. And there's pronghorn all over the hills. That's what we're up there hunting. Well, what happens when you're out there is that you're driving out and you go, okay, hey, there's a pronghorn about 10 miles that way. Drop down into a ridge, go hiking for a while through there, and then poke your head up and hope you get to the other side and that the pronghorn's still there. So what happens naturally is as you're doing that, you get up and you go, oh, I think it's this hill, and you peek over and they're not there. And you go, oh, must have been the next hill. You kind of go over and you go to the next hill and you go, oh, they're not there. And you go, okay, well, no, it was definitely that hill, but they must have moved and they moved this direction, so let's keep going. And so you keep basically just telling yourself, they're over this next hill, over the next hill, they're over the next hill. And hey, you know what, Dina? Sometimes they probably are, right? That is a reality. They might be over the next hill, but we don't necessarily know that. And so taking this back to entrepreneurship, that's that what I like to call problem solving fever that people wind up with, where it's like, I just want to solve the next problem, solve the next problem, solve the next problem. And they go through that because they are good problem solvers. So they find the path of least resistance. I'm going to solve problems and I'm going to go keep fixing things. Well, if you don't take the time, again, going back to strategic pauses, to step back and recognize if you are working on the right thing, then now you're not solving the right problems. You're burning yourself out. You're, in the hunting example, you're going to keep going that direction. The truck's over here, right? You got all these kind of problems that you're running into with it. And so just like the pronghorn, right? Is the pronghorn over that next hill? I don't know. There's no way of knowing. It's a Schrodinger's pronghorn, right? You don't know until you go over the hill. But what happens is then what's the strategic choice as a leader there? Well, how far am I from the truck? How much water have I had? Does it make sense? How many more days am I going to be out here hunting? And you start to think about all these other variables, and you can go, you know what? It might be over that hill, but I'm going to head back to the truck and we need to call it a day. Hey, I might, this email might save my business. It might be the thing that gets us the billions of dollars of funding and changes everything and all this. Yeah, it might be, but you should probably go spend time with your kids. And it's like those type of things where you zoom out and kind of think about it like, yes, these things could be big potential game changers for your business, but it doesn't mean you need to solve them right now. I think that is the really big key. And that's a hard dance. I can say this very simply. You can tell I've talked about this on podcasts before. I can put it, I can wax decently poetic about this, but that doesn't mean it's an easy thing to do. It's a very, very hard thing to do, of recognizing, does this really need to be done right now? Or can I take a pause and go spend some time with the family? And I think when it comes to entrepreneurs, you have to, again, it goes back to understanding yourself. If you know you're the type to do those 18-hour days, then when you're 50-50, the answer is take a break. And when you're 60-40, the answer should be take a break, because you know that you are going to push yourself that direction. Same kind of thing if you're if you're your own biggest critic, right? Then you got to kind of start discounting when you're critiquing yourself a little bit. Like, all right, that's probably not that totally true, because I'm beating up on myself all the time. These things can't all be true, right? You have to overcorrect, but not overcorrect, but you have to correct it slightly. And that takes understanding what your own natural behavior is. So if you're the type to go solve the problem, to go do the thing, and to cut out, the family, then when you're in those situations, you can't decide, you got to lean towards the family. And that just goes back to the self-reflection we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, very much so. I was always the person that said, oh, it's a holiday 3-day weekend, so I'm just going to be in the office by myself and get so much done, instead of going out and doing something with people I care about. And so,
and I think the one thing on that, sorry, just to say, and they're not mutually exclusive. I think that's the other piece. I genuinely, Dina, I got frustrated with the amount of people I'd have on our podcast that were these, these guys that are, 60, 65, retired, sold off 5 businesses for X millions of dollars, and they can talk all those things. And then they go, Cam, I realized after I sold my 8th business that family is what really matters. And it's like, oh, really? Once you had $250 million, you went and spent time with your family. It's like, okay, that's cool. But for us entrepreneurs who are frankly in the shit and still going through it, that's where you have to find that balance. That's not a good enough answer for me, that I'm just going to go through life and be a crappy husband and then one day go, oh, I made enough money, now I could be good. No, you could do both at the same time. And I think that's the challenge to a lot of entrepreneurs, because there's success stories out there of the people who completely disregarded their life, their health, and their family to go be successful. There's also people out there who are healthy and are successful. And I think that's one of those things, we just tend to gravitate towards those other stories because they're crazier, they're a little more exciting. And it's wild to think about people who are gambling their money as an entrepreneur, quite literally sometimes, right? But the reality is that's not the life you want to live. You don't want the ups and downs of that kind of stuff. If you want to just have more in your life as you're building your business, it takes that little bit of pause, those strategic pauses, to make sure that you're doing the right kind of things.
Yeah, absolutely. This was a great conversation. Thank you for being here.
Oh, no. Thank you for pulling it out of me.
Well, any last words?
Actually, and I do have one last word, ikigai. No, I'll have to find it, but I don't know if this is a concept you've heard of. It's a Japanese philosophy, and I just written that down when we were talking earlier. So you said any last words, I looked down and see ikigai, so I got to say it. Folks, I won't even dive into it completely because we've been going for a while. But folks, look up ikigai, IKIGAI. And it is a really interesting philosophy that dives into a lot of what we were talking about on entrepreneurship and purpose. So that's what my last word is, ikigai.
Awesome. I have heard of it. I have learned about it, and it's pretty good. So
it's a good system for it. It makes sense.
Yeah, I will definitely put it in the show notes for everybody. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and all the twists and turns we took, because we did cover a lot of ground. Hopefully it's helpful to our audience, and you guys know where to find me in the Scars to Stars live group if you want to comment on anything. So hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.
I'm so happy you joined us for this conversation. My wish is that you found comfort and hope in your own unique situation. If you resonated with our message, please head over to therealizefoundation.org, where you can apply to write your own story in one of our books. You can also download our 60 Ideas for Self-Care on the resources page. I can't wait to hear from you. Until next time, you are not alone, you are worthy, and you are enough.